We're reading A Course in Miracles, chapter 19. The Attainment of Peace is the name of this chapter, and we're on this interesting section called The Obstacles to Peace, which is section 4, and then it's one of the few places in the course that has subsections. So we read the first subsection yesterday, which is A, the first obstacle, the desire to get rid of it. And now we're reading a subsection of that, which is one, or little I, the attraction of guilt. And I just want to mention that apparently the original name for this section was the Messengers of Love, and I'm going by the this version that has the handwritten notes of Helen, her original handwritten notes. So it's called the Messengers of Love, but here in the third edition, the blue third edition, it's called the attraction of guilt. Here we go. The attraction of guilt produces fear of love, for love would never look on guilt at all. It is the nature of love to look upon only the truth, for there it sees itself, with which it would unite in holy union and completion. As love must look past fear, so must fear see love not. For love contains the end of guilt, as surely as fear depends on it. Love is attracted only to love. Overlooking guilt completely, it sees no fear. Being wholly without attack, it could not be afraid. Fear is attracted to what love sees not, and each believes that what the other looks upon does not exist. Fear looks on guilt with just the same devotion that love looks on itself. And each has messengers which it sends forth, and which return to it with messages written in the language in which their going forth was asked. Love's messengers are gently sent and return with messages of love and gentleness. The messengers of fear are harshly ordered to seek out guilt and cherish every scrap of evil and of sin that they find, losing none of them on pain of death, and laying them respectfully before their Lord and Master. Perception cannot obey two masters, each asking for messages of different things in different languages. What fear would feed upon, love overlooks. What fear demands, love cannot even see. The fierce attraction that guilt holds for fear is wholly absent from love's gentle perception. What love would look upon is meaningless to fear and quite invisible. Relationships in this world are the result of how the world is seen, and this depends on which emotion was called on to send its messengers to look upon it and return with word of what they saw. Fear's messengers are trained through terror, and they tremble when their master calls on them to serve them. For fear is merciless even to its friends. Its messengers steal guiltily away in hungry search of guilt, for they are kept cold and starving and made very vicious by their master, who allows them to feast only upon what they return to him. No little shred of guilt escapes their hungry eyes, and in their savage search for sin, they pounce on any living thing they see and carry it screaming to their master to be devoured. Send not these savage messengers into the world to feast upon it and to prey upon reality, for they will bring you word of bones and skin and flesh. They have been taught to seek for the corruptible and to return with gorges filled with things decayed and rotten. To them, such things are beautiful because they seem to allay their savage pangs of hunger, for they are frantic with the pain of fear and would avert the punishment of him who sends them forth by offering him what they hold dear. The Holy Spirit has given you love's messengers to send instead of those you trained through fear. They are as eager to return to you what they hold dear as are the others. If you send them forth, they will see only the blameless and the beautiful, the gentle and the kind. They will be as careful to let no little act of charity, no tiny expression of forgiveness, no little breath of love escape their notice. And they will return with all the happy things they found to share them lovingly with you. Be not afraid of them. They offer you salvation. Theirs are the messages of safety, for they see the world as kind. If you send forth only the messengers the Holy Spirit gives you, wanting no messages but theirs, you will see fear no more. The world will be transformed before your sight, cleansed of all guilt and softly brushed with beauty. The world contains no fear that you laid not upon it, and none you cannot ask love's messengers to remove from it and see it still. The Holy Spirit has given you his messengers to send to your brother and return to you with what love sees. They have been given to replace the hungry dogs of fear you sent instead, and they go forth to signify the end of fear. Love, too, would set a feast before you on a table covered with a spotless cloth, set in a quiet garden where no sound but singing and a softly joyous whispering is ever heard. This is a feast that honors your holy relationship and at which everyone is welcomed as an honored guest. And in a holy instant, grace is said by everyone together as they join in gentleness before the table of communion. And I will join you there as long ago I promised and promise still. For in your new relationship am I made welcome, and where I am made welcome, there I am. I am made welcome in the state of grace, which means you have at last forgiven me. For I became the symbol of your sin, and so I had to die instead of you.
Dad!
Yeah, bud. Wow!
Mommy did it.
Wow, that's great. Sunny just showed me a little picture that Mommy made. Let's do this paragraph again. Yeah, bud.
That bug, now that poisonous bug is here.
Yeah, be careful, bud. Be careful.
How did it get here?
I don't know, bud. Here we go. I am made welcome in the state of grace, which means you have at last forgiven me. For I became the symbol of your sin, and so I had to die instead of you. To the ego, sin means death, and so atonement is achieved through murder. Salvation is looked upon as a way by which the Son of God was killed instead of you. Yet would I offer you my body, you whom I love, knowing its littleness? Or would I teach you that bodies cannot keep us apart? Mine was of no greater value than yours, no better means for communication of salvation, but not its source. No one can die for anyone, and death does not atone for sin, but you can live to show it is not real. The body does appear to be the symbol of sin, while you believe that it can get you what you want. While you believe that it can give you pleasure, you will also believe that it can bring you pain. To think you could be satisfied and happy with so little is to hurt yourself, and to limit the happiness that you would have calls upon pain to fill your meager store and make your life complete. This is completion as the ego sees it. For guilt creeps in where happiness has been removed and substitutes for it. Communion is another kind of completion which goes beyond guilt because it goes beyond the body. So this is the attraction of guilt. This section is the attraction of guilt. It's quite a stark. You have on one side you have the hungry dogs that are out to seek the tiny scraps of fear that you have trained the dog. You have trained the dogs by following the ego. You have trained these dogs to look for guilt and to behold guilt and behold fear and judgment, etc. That's what the hungry dogs of the ego are looking for. And they will find it because that is what you sent them to do. You train the dogs. You have trained those dogs. Just trying to put this again in a little nutshell. And then on the other side, you have this beautiful table that has been laid. Let's read this passage. This is such a lovely passage. Love, too, would set a feast before you on a table covered with a spotless cloth, set in a quiet garden where no sound but singing and a softly joyous whispering is ever heard. This is a feast that honors your holy relationship and in which everyone is welcomed as an honored guest. And in a holy instant, grace is said by everyone together as they join in gentleness before the table of communion. And I will join you there as long ago I promised and promise still. For in your new relationship am I made welcome, and where I am made welcome, there I am. Let's continue. The next paragraph too is quite beautiful. Obviously, this is Jesus. This is like the true Last Supper Jesus is talking about here, right? I am made welcome in the state of grace, which means you have at last forgiven me. For I became the symbol of your sin, and so I had to die instead of you. So, one thing that Jesus is doing here, obviously, is he's talking about atonement. Now, atonement, as we know, not just in Judaism, but in a lot of the ancient religions, animal sacrifices were brought as atonement. They were a way to appease the gods. They were obeisances to the gods, and including the Jewish God. And it's been pointed out, I think correctly, that Judaism was not originally monotheistic, although the seed of it was there for sure, but it was more henotheistic. Henotheism meaning that there's a main God and then there's subsidiary deities. So when God said in the Ten Commandments, the first commandment, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me, that seemed to indicate that there were other gods. And obviously there are angels and demons that came in, certainly angels, which you could say are like deities, the angels and the demons. So henotheism means that there's a main God and then there are subsidiary deities. But the point to be made here is this idea of atonement, that to atone for sin, you had to bring a body. First, it was an animal's body, right? And there is that fascinating story in the Old Testament where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his only son, and it's a test, and it's partly maybe to show that Judaism at that time was a improvement over the idol worshiping nations that would bring children as sacrifices. So this is a way of saying, yeah, we don't do that. Our God doesn't ask for child sacrifices. That's crazy. But animal sacrifices, yeah, to atone for sin. But then you got Jesus. You got the idea of an atonement through a death. Now, obviously, Jesus in the Course is using that word in a different way. Atonement for the Course, as has been said many times. I've said it many times myself. Is the sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for him or herself. Right? What is the atonement? The atonement is the idea that there is no separation from God. The ego is not real. If there's no separation, if separation is an impossibility, then there is no sin. And there is nothing to atone for. There's no need for forgiveness. God does not ask of anything of us. Why would God? Because God doesn't even know about the dream. That's maybe one of the most important pieces of the metaphysics of A Course in Miracles, which is that God just is. God is not a person. God does not need to be appeased. God does not need anything from us. God does not need our prayers. God does not need anything except we need, if anything, we need God. We need the idea of God, the true God. What this really, what that really means, which is being, the loving presence. And how to, and so the acceptance of the atonement, the only atonement to bring, if anything, is where you accept that idea that we are still at home in God, dreaming of exile. We have never left. It has never changed. It could never change. So where is the problem? Right? The problem is only our belief that there is. Our belief in separation is the problem. And Jesus is saying, yes, okay, let's get you on the right path now, which is where you realize, and I'm bringing you this message to tell you it's true. This is true. You do not need to suffer. There is no need for atonement. There is no need for suffering and pain. Guilt is not real. Sin is not real. Forgiveness is not even necessary. Although you think it is, and so it is. Whatever the Son desires, whatever the Son thinks, he makes real in his mind. You can continue, and Jesus is saying, but there is a reality, and that reality we're going to call God, and that reality is when you release all of the illusions. When you release your tiny will, which would be the ego, and you accept God's will. As Jesus said famously in the Gospels, when he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asks God to take the cup away from him. He says, God, please take this cup from me. But then he says, not my will, but thy will. Even though I'm asking you for this, it's not my will, it's your will. Just as Arjuna says to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, I'm not going to fight this battle, Krishna. I don't want to fight. I will not fight. But I'm open. I'm open to what you have to tell me about this. I'm open to your counsel. So Jesus says something very similar. In the Gospels, he says, whether he really said this or not is, but in the Gospels, at least, he says, not my will, but thy will. In our will, whatever we will, whatever the Son wants, we get, and Jesus is saying, but don't you want the love and the peace of God? If you want that, you can have that. If you don't want that, then you won't have it. But if you do want it, it's there. So it's all about untraining those dogs. But it's not even about that. It's really about having that little willingness for the holy instant. Having that little willingness, accepting the atonement principle, and having that little willingness to at least be open, even if you can't fully accept the atonement principle, which is that there is no separation from God, but at least you could be open to it. And if you're open to it, and you want that to be true, part of it is we don't want it to be true. That was the previous section, which is the desire to get rid of peace. There's a certain level of resistance that we have, where we resist the simple truth. We don't want it. Why? Because we are attached to the body. We're attached to this world and bodies and being an individual. That seems a lot more attractive to us, or at least it has been, than being a nobody. Who wants to be a nobody? I guess maybe you do. If you're a student of a course, you may be starting to open to that possibility that, maybe you've been a somebody, maybe you are a somebody, maybe you have, a following, maybe you have success in life, but it hasn't fulfilled you. And so maybe you start to become open to the possibility of being a nobody. As Emily Dickinson wrote, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? So ultimately it comes down to forgiving your brother for what he has not done. Forgiving Jesus ultimately. You have to even forgive Jesus. He says, I am made welcome in the state of grace, which means you have at last forgiven me. For I became the symbol of your sin, and so I had to die instead of you. So that's the ego, is that, it's one or the other. For the ego, it's either I die or you die. We both can't win. One of us has to be right and the other wrong. To the ego, sin means death, and so atonement is achieved through murder. Salvation is looked upon as a way by which the Son of God was killed instead of you. Yet would I offer you my body for whom I love, knowing its littleness? Or would I teach you that bodies cannot keep us apart? Mine was of no greater value than yours, no better means for communication of salvation, but not its source. No one can die for anyone, and death does not atone for sin, but you can live to show it is not real. So you can live, the purpose of the Course, you could say, is to show that the ego is not real. Sin is not real. The ego is not real. And nothing need keep us apart. Love is attracted to love. And when we share the love, it comes back to us and we all see it together. And that's the miracle. Thank you for listening, and we will continue. The next section is section B. The second obstacle, the belief the body is valuable for what it offers. See you soon.